Aloha, I'm Reverend Tim Lytle, Senior Minister here at Unity Church of Hawaii in Honolulu. And we are so grateful for all of you who watch us on our YouTube channel. We know with you that as you view these teachings and apply them to your lives, that it helps to build your life into the very best one that can be imagined. If you're ever in the area, please come and join us for a service, and please enjoy the message that you're about to watch. Aloha.
It is so good to be with you all on this glorious Hawaii morning. And today we are looking at the topic of For the Love of God. Now, sometimes we've heard that expression in a way that didn't necessarily reflect the words, but that is what we're looking at today, is how For the Love of God liberates us from worry, anxiety, neuroses. Now, I did a poll in the early service. It's a rough anecdotal estimate, but only about 20% of them raised their hands. I suspect otherwise. How many people here have any kind of neurosis? Okay, so the second crowd is definitely more honest. Oops, we'll keep that right here. A neurosis is like, worries, things that we get caught up in. We get caught up in these stories in our mind, and we begin to believe the stories in our mind. We think they're factual. We think that, whatever crazy making we're doing in our own mind is actual reality. And bless you, it can be a scary experience, Like I'm thinking, when I was a kid, I thought everybody was against me. So what did I experience? I experienced everyone being against me because my outer world reflected what I was holding onto in the inside. Charles Fillmore says that love is the great harmonizing experience, that we harmonize to ourselves that which we are holding on to. So I was holding on to this idea that everybody was against me, so it makes sense that my life reflected that, and it felt that way until I decided, I can change my mind. I can change my heart. I can change what's going on inside of me, or I can stay neurotic, and it's okay. I'm not trying to talk you out of your neurosis. It might be what makes you colorful and interesting. Actually, no, you are much more interesting without it. Trust me on this. But it gets in the way. And basically, underneath all of it, there's one word: fear. Fear. Fear that somehow we're separate. Fear that somehow we're not going to get what we need. Fear that somehow we're cut off from God. Fear that somehow we're separate from each other. Fear gets in the way. I used to think that love and hate were opposites. And I reflected on that. And I thought about the people that I was tempted to hate. And I realized that anybody I was tempted to hate, I considered to be important to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be investing the energy and thinking so many negative thoughts about them. So I realized love and hate are not opposites. They're like flip sides of the same coin. But what I realized is that love and fear are opposites. And where the presence of love is, fear dissipates. So, in Wichita, I got close to the Muslim community. Some people were holding folks at a distance, but I got involved and I got to know them, and I found that same oneness of spirit. I found that same oneness of the presence of God. And when there is that divine love eliminates and dissipates fear. Where there is fear, there is an absence of the experience of love. If you are in an environment or relationship where fear is the predominant factor, I can guarantee you that love is not in its full expression. So I want to look at this passage of Scripture. John was an apostle. You know, the first 4 Gospels in the Christian Scriptures, the ones that made the final cut after Constantine, there were over 20 Gospels written, but the 4 that made it into what's called the canon, the approved Christian Scriptures, and I study the others also. But Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then towards the end of the Christian Scriptures, there's these letters that are written, like there's 1st and 2nd Peter, and 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Well, those are letters, and John was writing these letters. And in 1 John chapter 4, verse 16 and 18, the New King James Version, we have known and believed the love that God has for us. Okay, so he's starting at the same place where we in Unity start, with the presence of God. That there's only truly one presence and one power, active as our lives and as the universe, God the good, omnipotence. Now this is very different, and I love you all that might be watching me from my church of origin. I love you, I bless you. You don't have to agree with me. But when I went to the religious school of that particular denomination, they taught us that the first thing we had to study in theology, otherwise the rest of the theology would not make sense, the first thing we had to understand was sin. It didn't start with God. It didn't start with love. It didn't start with salvation. It started with sin. Because they said our beliefs will not make any sense without it. And they're right. It doesn't make any sense without it. Okay, enough. I love you. So, we have known and believed the love that God has for us. God is love. Wow. God is love. And the one who abides in love abides in God, and God in that one. So if you're abiding in the presence of love, you're abiding in the presence of God. They're non-different. You cannot separate them. If you are in the presence of genuine love, you are in the presence of God. Verse 18, there is no fear in love. I mean, John sounds so New Thought. But it's just, New Thought just picked up on truth. I mean, you know, we didn't invent it. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Now, perfect. In the Greek Christian scriptures, which most of our manuscripts and oldest manuscripts of the Christian scriptures are written in Greek, even though a number of them may have been spoken in Aramaic. And in the Greek, that word for perfect is teleos. Teleos. Let's say that together. Teleos. It sounds like the word telescope. And sure enough, the word telescope comes from that word teleos, which means completion, fulfillment. You know, you start here and you see something a long ways off. There's connection. There's fulfillment. So, perfect love, that is complete, full expression of love, casts out fear because fear involves torment. And I would agree with that. I think you could say fear involves suffering. All right. Pain is part of the human experience. However, suffering is optional. I'll say that again. Pain is part of the human experience, but suffering is optional. And what I mean by suffering is feeling a sense of disconnect, feeling a sense of separation from our divine source, feeling a sense of separation from each other. Suffering is the attitude that we may adopt about the pain that we're experiencing, but it's optional. So, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment or suffering. The one who fears has not been made perfect in love. All right, so let me get to Sanskrit. All right, you had your Greek lesson. Prema. Let's say that word together. Prema. Congratulations, you now know Sanskrit. Wow, that was so easy. If someone asks you, what'd you learn today at Unity Church of Hawaii? You can say, I learned Sanskrit. Prema is the word for pure, unadulterated love of God, the highest perfectional stage of life, where there is constant engagement in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. That's in quotation marks because I'm quoting from Srila Prabhupada. So, prema is this divine love. Now, would you agree that love takes away fear? Are you having to think about that? Having to chew on it? Have you ever seen a couple that's falling? Why do we call it falling? Falling in love. I mean, you know, I looked off my balcony, my lanai, the other night, you know, and because I heard some noise outside. Oh, yeah, there was noise, all right. I thought, get a room. Just saying. You know, falling in love makes us lose some of our inhibitions and fears. It makes us forget some of the things that normally we'd be very conscious of. And I'm really happy that, you know, when my wife and I are out in public, sometimes people say, how long you been married? Are you newlyweds? I mean, that's so cool, you know, to unendingly be newlyweds. Love takes away our inhibitions. So, getting up here every Sunday morning, I mean, I don't get too worried about it because it's out of love. So I'm not thinking so much about performance or this or that thing. It's more about love. When we are acting from a place of divine love, fears are eliminated. They're dissipated. You know? I've seen people do amazingly brave things out of love. Someday, if you want to see my leg, I'll show you my leg. I have 2 marks right here from a Rottweiler, big Rottweiler. I was a little kid. I was on my bicycle on Benjamin Drive in Wichita, Kansas, riding my bike home from school. 2 Rottweilers, big ones, they looked cute. They were bigger than me. Came running down. We lived in an area called Benjamin Hills. Lots of hills there. And these 2 big Rottweilers whoosh, running full charge straight at me. Like dinner! Meals on wheels. I thought, how convenient for them. And so here I was, this little kid on my bicycle, and they charged me. And it's kind of cold out, so I had on my coat. One of them sunk their teeth into my coat, and they worked together as a team and pulled me down off the bicycle so I was down flat on the ground. Strategy. And at the same time that one did that, the other one that was waiting sunk its teeth into my leg. I'm like, I'm a goner. How can I take these guys on? You know? Now, my mom can't fly this far anymore. I wish you all could meet her. Max, have you met my mom? No? Okay. She's about this tall. Hi, Mom. She's about this tall, and that woman came flying out of the front door with her broom and got those dogs to take off. Now, I reflected on that later, and I thought, where did she get the strength and the power to do that? I don't think she really stopped to think about it a lot. It was the power of love that overcame any inhibitions or fears that she might have. And the dogs saw that little woman with the broom, and they took off. I've never forgotten that. When we are really, really falling in love with God. Now, God is everywhere fully present, living in, through, and as us. But when we are fully falling in love with God, we lose our fears, we lose our anxiety and our worry, because we're focusing on our true source. It's sometimes referred to as reinstituting our true constitutional nature. That was a mouthful. It's sometimes referred to as reinstituting our true constitutional nature. That is, we're built for God. We're built for alignment with God. We are the presence of God in action. But when we get locked into this idea of separation, or that someone or something is against us, then we fall out of alignment with understanding that that presence, that love, is there with us always. Now, this weekend is a very special day. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories here. But yesterday was the appearance day of Lord Nishrimadev. You may say, who's Lord Nishrimadev? Would you say that? Maybe? Anyway, okay. Who is that? Who is that? Okay, so who that? So let's see. Okay, so if we can dim these stage lights just a little bit. This is Lord Nishrimadev. And okay, some more Sanskrit. Okay, the first part of that, nar, means man, and Shishima means lion. So man, lion, and this is an incarnation of Krishna. So, tonight, starting at 4:30 with a big feast at 6, the Krishna temple is celebrating his appearance day. Like, woohoo, birthday party. Now this little guy over here, okay, that's Prahlada. Prahlada was this, as a baby in the womb, bless you, as a baby in the womb, Prahlada heard prayers and chanting and singing as he was still in his mother's womb. And as a baby still in the womb, he chose to fall in love with God. And so as a very small child, he was still very, very much in love with God and continued to develop that. But his father was a very, very practical person, even more than practical. He said, "What's this nonsense? Worshiping God and seeking God? That's a bunch of baloney. I forbid it. Stop it. Snap out of it." But Prahlada kept on with his devotion and his love of God. His father, who was a king, had a very, very bad temper, as you're about to find out. His father first tried to poison his own son. Yeah, I know. Not a very good bedtime story, huh? But Prahlada lived. Yay. You're cracking me up, Terry. Okay. And then Prahlada's father said, "I know what? I'll start a stampede of elephants and have the elephants trample him to death." But he survived the stampede. His father's like, what am I to do? I'm trying to get rid of this kid. And so then he throws him in a dungeon full of poisonous snakes. And again, he's delivered. And the father's so mad. It's like, why can't I kill this kid? Awful story, right? But there's a good point to this story. And the little boy is like, I just want to serve God. I just want to love God. I just want to love God with all my heart, mind, soul, and strength. You've heard that before, right? And, the father is furious. And he says, I'm going to break one of these pillars, and you say God is everywhere, watching over you. Well, let's just see. I'm going to break this pillar, and then we'll see if your God comes out to help you. And so he breaks the pillar, and out, boop, pops Nashrimadev. And I won't go into the gory details, but Nashrimadev takes care of the father. Now, we have similar stories in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, like Daniel. I mean, some of you grew up with these stories. Daniel was this person who refused to give in to circumstances, refused to give in to the way things looked on the outside. He was an exile in a foreign, hostile environment. And he was told, you must give up your worship of God. You must give up this love, this prema for God. He's like, not doing it. They said, well, it's to the lion cage for you, buddy. So they threw him into the lion's den, and an angel of the Lord came down, and just pretty soon the lions were just purring and licking his hand. We have those stories in the Hebrew scriptures, the Christian scriptures, of God protecting the devotee, God protecting our devotion and our love. And it's the same message, in different sources. I have numerous spiritual connections. One of them is Sufism. In Sufism, we're taught that there's nothing higher or better than love for God. And so, in Sufism, we'll sometimes see what are called God-intoxicated devotees. We see that in the Krishna movement too, or in other places. And mystics from the ages have described this experience. People like Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross. Different people have described this prema, this love for God that overcomes all fear, overcomes all these worries and anxieties. So, if your life is plagued with worries, anxieties, neuroses, let me suggest to you love of God, prema. Find ways to give beyond yourself, to get outside of yourself. When I went through chaplaincy training called CPE, I was working in a mental health hospital. I was working a lot with drug addiction, alcohol addiction, going to lots of recovery groups. And people would be encouraged to find a higher power. And for some people, that was a real difficult thing to experience. A higher power. Because they were used to thinking of themselves as, that's it. There's no one or nothing else. And yet, in the process, and I would work with some of these folks in discovering their higher power or listen to their fifth step, they would discover this presence, this power. And why is that important in recovery? Well, it's important to know that there's something beyond ourselves that can help give us strength, that can help embolden us, just like my little mom with the broom was not afraid to take on these huge dogs, which were bigger than her, but that prema, that love, emboldened her. When we connect with that source, when we connect with that power, when we connect with that love, it transcends. That's why it's called transcendental. It transcends all the mundane stuff of this world that we get all caught up in. In Sanskrit, it's called Maya, illusion. It transcends that. What I want to recommend to you is that we live our lives for the love of God. We use that expression, for the love of God. Make that your daily mantra. That all that I do and all that I am is for the love of God. See how that dissipates some of the worries and neuroses. A couple of weeks ago, I gave an assignment to write down 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have some of you done that? And to write down your personal mission statement. It's important for us to focus on something bigger than ourselves. A goal so big, so audacious, so ridiculous that we couldn't do it in our own human personality. We need to stretch ourselves for the love of God. Aloha.